Tenho um enorme prazer, uma honra, chamar para o palco Tom Woods, que vai falar sobre a desconhecida depressão de 1920 e 1921. O Tom é um membro sênior do Mises Institute, especialista em história americana, autor de 9 livros, incluindo os best-sellers The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History e, mais recentemente, Meltdown. E entre seus outros livros de sucesso estão Como a Igreja Católica Construiu a Civilização Ocidental, 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask, e The Church and the Market, A Catholic Defense of the Free Economy. Bem-vindo, Tom.
Thank you very much. Very, very glad to be here. This is my first time in Brazil, and it's wonderful what you folks are doing, establishing a Mises Institute here in Brazil. And we were just fantasizing the other night about what could be better. What could be better than Mises Brazil? And I don't know if anything could be better, but maybe at least as good would be the opening of Mises Cuba someday, right? That would be nice. We could all wear our red Ludwig von Mises shirts that from a distance people think are Che Guevara shirts, but they're not. They're not. Now, I normally, and you can verify this via YouTube, speak extemporaneously. I speak very fast. I tell a lot of jokes. I'm not going to do any of those things today for the sake of our poor, suffering translators back here, who I think, by the way, have done an absolutely fantastic job. I'm amazed, given how fast some of us do speak, that they can make anything coherent out of it whatsoever. So that's wonderful. Oh, good. There you go. That's good. But I'm told that jokes don't really translate very well, so I won't be telling them. I'm going to stick largely to prepared remarks, at least until the end, just for this reason. I'm also amazed, by the way, before I really get started, to note how many of you have heard of and even actually read my book, Meltdown. I'm astonished at this. People have said how nice it would be to have a Portuguese translation, but I guess you guys don't need one. So many of you speak such beautiful English. I'm amazed at this, so thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize I had a Portuguese language audience, but apparently I do. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, well, I'm going to talk today about an episode in American history that, or in United States history, that most students in my country know nothing about. So you will know much, much better than students in the United States what happened in the United States in 1920 to 21. But remember, this I don't mean that as a huge compliment, since most people in the United States know absolutely zero about this episode, and I think you will come to understand why that is. Why this episode is not discussed in American life very often. And then toward the end, I am going to say a few words about the current crisis that the United States is enduring, and other countries as well. Well, it is a cliche that if we do not study the past, we are condemned to repeat it. But almost equally certain is that if there are lessons to be learned from a historical episode, the political class will draw all the wrong ones, and often deliberately so. So instead of viewing the past as a source of wisdom and insight, political regimes have a habit of employing history as an ideological weapon to be distorted and manipulated in the service of present-day ambitions. That's what Winston Churchill meant when he described the history of the Soviet Union as unpredictable. For this reason, we should not be surprised that political leaders in the United States have made such transparently ideological use of the past in the wake of the financial crisis that hit the United States in late 2007. According to the endlessly repeated conventional wisdom, the Great Depression of the 1930s was the result of capitalism run riot, and only the wise interventions of progressive politicians restored prosperity. Now, many of those who concede that the so-called New Deal programs of President Franklin Roosevelt did not themselves succeed in lifting the country out of depression, nevertheless go on to suggest that the massive government spending during World War II is what did it. Incidentally, even some people who claim to be free market supporters make this claim, that World War II got the United States out of the Great Depression, but as soon as you make that claim, you immediately hand the entire theoretical argument over to supporters of fiscal stimulus, who will then say that apparently if the stimulus is great enough, the depression goes away. So I reject the World War II solved the Great Depression problem, but I've discussed that elsewhere. The connection between this version of history and the events of today is obvious enough. Once again, we're told, wildcat capitalism has created a terrific mess, and once again, only a combination of fiscal and monetary stimulus can save us. Now, in order to make sure that this version of events sticks, little, if any, public mention is ever made of the Depression of 1920 to 21. And no wonder. That historical experience deflates the ambitions of those who promise us political solutions to the real imbalances at the heart of economic busts. The conventional wisdom holds that in the absence of government counter-cyclical policy, whether fiscal or monetary or both, we cannot expect economic recovery, at least not without an intolerably long delay. Yet the very opposite policies were followed during the Depression of 1920 to 21, and recovery was in fact not long in coming. The economic situation in 1920 was grim. By that year, unemployment had jumped very quickly from 4% to 12%. GNP had declined very substantially. All the indicators to which we refer for a rough estimate of the economy's health were very bad indeed. No wonder then that Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, falsely characterized as a supporter of laissez-faire economics, urged President Warren Harding to consider an array of interventions to turn the economy around. Thankfully, Hoover was ignored. Instead of so-called fiscal stimulus in the form of massive increases in government spending, Warren Harding cut the government's budget nearly in half between 1920 and 1922. Now, part of this has to be attributed to the outgoing president, Woodrow Wilson. But Wilson had suffered 2 strokes toward the end of his second term and was largely debilitated by that time. So even if he had been inclined to engage in massive increases in government activity, his health was not such that he would have been able to do that. The rest of Harding's approach was equally laissez-faire. He slashed top marginal income tax rates, and as the 1920s proceeded, marginal income tax rates for all groups fell. The national debt was reduced by 1/3. The Federal Reserve's activity was hardly noticeable. And yet, as one economic historian puts it, despite the severity of the contraction, the Fed did not move to use its powers to turn the money supply around and fight the contraction, and yet recovery was not long in coming. In fact, by the late summer of 1921, signs of recovery were already visible. The following year, unemployment was back down to 6.7% and was only 2.4% by 1923. Now, it's instructive to compare the American response in this period to that of Japan. In 1920, the Japanese government introduced the fundamentals of a planned economy with the aim of keeping prices artificially high. We can't allow so-called deflation. Well, Benjamin Anderson, who was a great 20th century economist, said as follows about the Japanese experience. The great banks, the concentrated industries, and the government got together, destroyed the freedom of the markets, arrested the decline in commodity prices, and held the Japanese price level high above the receding world level for 7 years. During these years, Japan endured chronic industrial stagnation, and at the end, in 1927, she had a banking crisis of such severity that many great branch bank systems went down, as well as many industries. Still quoting Benjamin Anderson, "It was a stupid policy. In the effort to avert losses on inventory representing 1 year's production, Japan lost 7 years." Now, the U.S., by contrast, allowed its economy to readjust. Once again, Benjamin Anderson. In 1920 to 21, we took our losses, we readjusted our financial structure, we endured our depression, and in August 1921, we started up again. The rally in business production and employment that started in August 1921 was soundly based on a drastic cleaning up of credit weakness, a drastic reduction in the costs of production, and on the free play of private enterprise. It was not based on governmental policy designed to make business good. And so the federal government did not do what Keynesian economists ever since have urged it to do: run unbalanced budgets and prime the pump through increased expenditures. Rather, there prevailed the old-fashioned view that government should keep spending and taxation low and reduce the public debt. Those were the economic themes of Warren Harding's presidency.